My name is Pablo Ritter, 36 years old, once an offshore oil rig engineer in Texas, a job I thought would give me a stable life, but now it's nothing more than a distant memory, shattered like the broken glass beneath my feet. I'm unemployed now, not because I lacked skill, but because a devastating event knocked me flat, leaving me drained and wandering through this bitterly cold night. The Texas winter cold isn't the pleasant kind. It seeps into your bones, gnaws at every fiber of muscle, making you feel small and insignificant. I drag my feet along the sidewalk, legs heavy as if weighted with lead, my breath coming out in thick white clouds under the sickly yellow streetlights. Everything around me seems to mock me. These are the darkest days of my life, a streak of days when I no longer know how much longer I can keep going. I clearly remember the day everything began to collapse, but this isn't the time to think about it. No, right now I just want to get back to the miserable rented room on the outskirts, the only place I still have to lay my head. That room has nothing but 4 moldy walls, a creaky old bed, and the stench of loneliness. I've sold everything of value. The old pickup truck is now my only means of transport, but tonight I chose to walk, as if I wanted to punish myself. The street is empty, not a soul around, only the wind howling through the skeletal trees carrying a few scattered snowflakes. Snow is rare in Texas, but when it comes, it brings a melancholy sadness, blanketing everything in white and making things look cleaner than they really are. I pull my old jacket tighter around me. The only jacket I have left, worn through at the shoulders and full of holes, but it's my last shield against the cold that's trying to swallow me whole. Every step is a struggle. I think about everything I've lost, the job, the family, the respect. My heart feels heavy, as though a boulder is crushing my chest, making every breath painful. You're a failure, Pablo, I tell myself silently, the voice in my head echoing like a scolding from the past. I used to be proud of myself, used to think I was the pillar of my family, but now I'm just a drifter. No money, no future. The cold pierces through my clothes, creeping into my skin, making me shiver uncontrollably. I stop for a moment, leaning against a street lamp, trying to take deep breaths to calm myself. The light shines down on the snow-dusted pavement, casting strange shadows that seem to whisper about my fate. I keep walking, heading toward the park, a large open area on the edge of town where children play during the day, but at night it's as silent as a graveyard. I usually cut through here to shorten the way home, even though it always feels desolate. Tonight, a thin layer of snow covers the grass, making everything look hazy under the moonlight. I walk slowly, trying to avoid patches of ice, when my eyes accidentally land on a figure on a bench. It's an old man, curled up, motionless like a corpse that hasn't yet gone cold. My heart tightens. In the darkness, he's just a crumpled shape wrapped in tattered rags, curled into a ball to fight the cold. The park is vast and empty, no one else around, only the wind whistling through the trees and snowflakes pattering down. The old man's body is trembling violently. I can see it from a distance, as if he's clinging to his last bit of warmth. I stop, hesitating. What the hell are you doing, Pablo? You can barely take care of yourself, that voice in my head says again, full of doubt. But I can't just walk away. Something urges me forward. I approach quietly, stepping lightly on the thin snow so as not to startle him. When I reach the bench, I bend down close to check on him. The smell of cold earth and dampness fills my nose. His lips are purple, deathly pale under the dim light, and his breath is a faint wisp of smoke that vanishes instantly. The old man is on the verge of freezing to death. I know it with certainty. His skin is ice cold when I lightly touch his hand, and his eyes struggle to open. He lets out a few broken sounds, something like, "So cold. Please help me." They're not full words, but I understand clearly. If I leave him, he won't survive the night. My heart pounds, adrenaline surging. This is Texas. Winter can kill, especially the homeless. I look around, no one, just wind and snow. I want to help somehow, but when I look at myself, no money, no food, nothing at all I can offer, except the old coat clinging to my body. It's the only thing keeping the cold at bay, the coat I wore on countless long work trips, now the very last remnant of my old life. I grit my teeth, trying to suppress the shivering. The decision comes quickly without a second's hesitation. I rip off the coat. The icy wind immediately rushes in, stabbing my skin like 1,000 needles. The cold is so intense I nearly collapse, but I don't stop. I drape the coat over the old man's frail body, wrapping the collar tightly to block the wind. He trembles. His eyes flutter open slightly, and I gently pat his shoulder, trying to pass on whatever little hope I have left in me. "You'll be okay, sir. Stay warm. Don't give up," I whisper, my voice shaking from both the cold and emotion. I'm not sure he can still hear me, but in my heart I know. I cannot let a man freeze to death right in front of me. That's the last principle I still have left among the ruins of my life. Without the coat, I stand up. The wind lashes my body like a whip. My shoulders slump, but my heart feels a little lighter. Even though my own life is falling apart, at least tonight I was still decent enough to save another human being. I continue walking into the darkness. Each step is torture. The cold pierces straight to the bone, forcing me to hug myself tightly. The park fades behind me, and I wonder if the old man will make it through the night. That thought makes my heart race, but deep down, I feel a faint warmth. That small act in the middle of this freezing winter night might be the only ray of light in my own darkness. Finally, I dragged myself back to the rundown motel room. The rusty iron door screeched as I pushed it open, and the familiar stench of damp mold hit me like a bitter greeting. I flicked the switch. The flickering neon light cast a sickly yellow glow over the 4 patchy walls, where black mold was spreading like it was the real owner of the place. I collapsed onto the creaky old bed, the springs groaning under my exhausted body. It was so cold. I wrapped the thin blanket around myself, but the chill from the streets had already seeped into my bones. Sitting there in that cramped, dark space, I couldn't hold back the tears when I thought about the life I once had. How could everything change so fast? Just a few months ago, I was a man who had it all. Now what was I? A failure, drifting through life like a shadow. I used to have a stable life. At least that's what I believed. My job as an offshore oil rig engineer in Texas paid well enough to take good care of my family, even though I was away from home for weeks, sometimes months at a time. Those long shifts out at sea, surrounded by endless ocean and the constant roar of machinery, wore me down. But I endured it because I knew someone was waiting for me back home. I was proud of our little cozy house on the outskirts of Houston, a 2-story place with a small garden I tended myself whenever I returned. My wife, Regina Ritter, 33 years old, worked in PR for an advertising firm. She was beautiful, with long, shiny brown hair and a smile that always lit up when she saw me at the door. And my son, Nasir Ritter, only 6 years old, he would come running and throw his arms around me, his eyes sparkling. Those moments were what kept me going through everything. I thought I had the perfect family, a life anyone would envy. But now, sitting in this stinking rented room, I realized it had all been an illusion. The past came rushing back like a knife twisting in my chest, hurting so much I had to clutch my heart. I remember that fateful day clearly, the day everything collapsed in just a few short minutes. It was a weekend afternoon. There had been a technical failure on the rig, a faulty pressure valve, so the whole crew had to stop work for repairs. I was allowed to go home earlier than expected, and I was strangely excited. I pictured Regina's face when I walked through the door unannounced, how she'd smile brightly, throw her arms around me, and we'd have a warm evening with Nasir. I drove my old pickup home, my heart racing like a lovesick teenager. On the way, I even stopped to buy a bouquet of red roses, Regina's favorite, and a small toy for Nasir. Today is going to be perfect, I told myself, smiling alone in the cab. But when I pulled up in front of the house, something was wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, and strange, giggling sounds were coming from inside. I walked in quietly, wanting to surprise them, but the real surprise was waiting for me. The bedroom door was cracked open, and through the gap I heard hurried breathing and the rhythmic creaking of the bed. My heart clenched. A terrible feeling rose inside me. I froze in the doorway, the bouquet trembling in my hand. But my legs moved forward on their own, pushing the door open. The sight in front of me turned me to stone. Regina, my wife, was wrapped around another man, none other than Case Harlow, 45 years old, CEO of Harlow Energy Group, the company I worked for. He was rich, powerful, his expensive suit now scattered across the floor, wearing that same cold expression I had always feared and respected at the office. Regina was on top of him, naked, sweating, her moans cutting through me like knives. I stood there for a few seconds as my whole world crumbled. Then shock turned into explosive rage. I charged in, yanked Case off the bed and roared, "What the hell are you doing with my wife?" The room erupted into chaos, furniture knocked over, the bouquet crushed underfoot on the floor. Case jumped up, with the strength of a man used to giving orders, and slammed me hard against the wall. My head hit the corner of the nightstand, pain shooting through me, but I didn't care. Regina didn't even try to explain. She just grabbed the sheet to cover herself and stood in front of him, protecting him as if I were the stranger, the enemy who had nothing to do with her life. "Pablo, stop it right now!" she screamed, her voice full of anger, not regret. I struggled to my feet, blood running down my forehead, and shouted in desperation and fury, "Why? Why are you both doing this to me? Regina, you're my wife. Case, you're my boss. How could you?" Silence lasted only a few seconds before Case let out a contemptuous laugh, cold and sharp, slicing straight into my flesh. He stood up slowly, pulling on his pants with deliberate calm, his eyes gleaming with triumph, as if this whole thing was nothing more than cheap entertainment. He raised an eyebrow and sneered, "You're just a lowly hired hand, Pablo. No money, no status, no value at all." He took a step toward me, lips curling in arrogance. "I'm the one who gives Regina the luxurious, glamorous life she's always wanted." Those mocking words were so poisonous I wanted to punch him again. Case looked at me like I was an insect beneath his shoe, cold, full of contempt, and that look made my whole body shake with humiliation and rage. Then Regina poured fuel on the fire, her voice ice cold. "I'm tired of it, Pablo. Tired of struggling, tired of you being away all the time, tired of a man with no future who drags me down with him. It's all your fault." She said it as if everything was my fault, as if all the years I had sacrificed for our family meant nothing. Rage made my whole body tremble. I choked back sobs, but still managed to force out a reply, my voice breaking with pain and anger. "Regina, do you have any idea what I've done for you all these years?" I pounded my chest, breathing hard. "I slaved away on that rig day and night, sent every penny home so you and Nasir would never want for anything." I took a step forward, eyes red. "I kept this family afloat every single day, and what were you doing?" When I mentioned our son, my voice completely broke, almost a desperate plea. "Think about our son. Nasir needs both his parents." But the worst part, Regina didn't even flinch. The confrontation ended in disaster. Regina got dressed, grabbed Case's hand, and walked out, leaving me collapsed on the floor, my chest aching from the naked betrayal and a humiliation I had never known before. I lay there, tears streaming down my face, listening to their car start outside. The house suddenly became terrifyingly quiet, broken only by Nasir's soft crying from the next room. He had woken up because of the noise. I held my son, trying to comfort him, but my heart was shattered. That night I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, asking myself what I had done wrong. The next morning I went to the office in a daze. Before I could even sit at my desk, the secretary called me into HR. The termination notice came out of nowhere with vague reasons like violation of company policy and unprofessional conduct. I knew immediately Case had gone after me. After what happened the night before, there was no place left for me in that company. I packed my things under the cold, curious, slightly pitying stares of my coworkers. People who didn't dare speak up for fear of offending the boss. They whispered behind my back, and I felt that isolation like a layer of ice covering me. When I got home, Regina was waiting with eyes like stone. She handed me a prepared divorce packet as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "Sign it, Pablo. We're done," she said flatly. In desperation, I tried to cling to the last shred of hope in our rotten marriage, begging her to reconsider for Nasir's sake. But it was useless. Regina let go without hesitation, took off her wedding ring, placed it on the table, and walked away, leaving behind one final cold declaration. If you don't agree, we'll see each other in court. I stood there as the door slammed shut, my heart in pieces. My life was now nothing but ashes. I held Nasir as he cried and asked, "Daddy, did Mommy leave us?" And I didn't know how to answer. Regina was gone, taking Case and her venomous words with her, leaving me with a stack of divorce papers and pain I couldn't put into words. Will I ever be able to get back up, or is this the end? The trial was over in a flash, so fast I barely had time to brace myself. It was a dreary morning at the Harris County Courthouse in Houston, the air thick with the smell of old paper and the hushed murmurs of broken lives. I walked into the courtroom wearing my only old suit, trying to look respectable, but my heart was pounding like a war drum. Regina sat on the other side, perfectly made up, flanked by an expensive lawyer who had clearly been paid for by Case, and then he showed up. Case Harlow, striding in with that arrogant smirk, as if this were just another business meeting instead of the hearing that would finish destroying my life. He wasn't an official witness, but his mere presence was enough to back every one of Regina's claims, using his power and influence to keep me cornered. I stared at him, rage squeezing my chest, but he only gave me a mocking half-smile as if I were beneath his notice. Regina began with a barrage of heavy accusations, her voice calm but venomous. She claimed I was emotionally abusive, controlling, irresponsible toward the family, words that left me stunned and speechless. He always controlled everything and never let me have any freedom, she told the judge, looking straight at him. He neglected our child because of work, and when he was home, all he did was argue. I wanted to scream that it was all lies, that I had sacrificed everything for this family, but my lawyer, a young guy I'd hired with the last of my money, could only shake his head helplessly. I barely got a chance to defend myself. Everything seemed to have been arranged in advance. Standing behind her, Case supplied evidence that conveniently favored Regina. Emails taken out of context to paint me as a tyrant, fabricated company reports portraying me as an unstable, short-tempered husband. "These are statements from colleagues," Regina's lawyer said, waving papers I knew for a fact Case had orchestrated. I tried to object, my voice shaking. "That's not true. I never..." But the judge cut me off, and the whole thing rolled forward like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. Because every major asset, the house, the cars, the savings accounts, had been in Regina's name alone, a stupid mistake I'd made years ago because I trusted her. I had no legal ground to keep anything. I'd thought it was a way to protect the family. Now it had become the weapon used against me. The judge ruled that all property and full custody of Nasir went to Regina. I was granted only limited visitation, a few supervised hours a week, because I lacked the financial means and emotional stability to care for my son. Every word of the ruling hit me like a hammer to the chest. The pain was so sharp I had to grip the chair to stay on my feet. I stood frozen in the courtroom, unable to comprehend how my life had slid this far, how I had nothing left to lose. Regina smiled with satisfaction. Case patted her shoulder like they'd just closed a lucrative deal, and all I could do was look at Nasir, my little boy sitting in the back row, eyes red from crying. While the world collapsed around me, he whispered, "Daddy," but I couldn't go to him because of the court order. I left the courthouse completely shattered, my steps heavy in the cold hallway. It felt as if the entire world had turned its back on me, leaving me to sink alone into an abyss no one would pull me out of. Rain started falling outside, heavy drops slapping my face like mockery. I wandered aimlessly through the downpour, not knowing where to go, only aware that the house was no longer home. Eventually, I went back one last time to quietly pack the few things I still had into the bed of my old pickup. Family photos, a couple of changes of clothes, some of Nasir's toys, everything crammed into worn cardboard boxes. Regina stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, looking at me with open contempt as if she couldn't wait to be rid of me. "Hurry up, Pablo. I don't want to see your face a second longer." she said, her voice ice cold. Nasir was sobbing, running to cling to my legs, crying, "Daddy, don't go. Don't leave me." His cries tore the air out of my lungs like someone was crushing my heart in their fist. I knelt down, held him one last time and whispered, "I'll come visit you, I promise." But deep inside, I knew everything was already lost. Homeless, wifeless, childless, the only place I could think to go was my parents. Carson Ritter and Fatima Ritter, the last people I hoped might open their door to me, even if just for a few weeks. I drove the old pickup toward the house I grew up in on the outskirts of town, my heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. I hadn't visited them regularly in years, but I told myself blood is thicker than water. When I pulled up, it was already dark, and the warm light glowing from the windows gave me a flicker of hope. I knocked. My father opened the door, and the look on his face made my stomach drop. Not joy, but irritation. Before I could even finish explaining my situation, Carson started yelling at me as if I were a burden that would bring shame on the family. "What the hell are you doing here? What kind of trouble did you drag back this time?" he roared, his voice echoing through the house. I tried to tell him about the divorce, losing my job, losing my son, but he cut me off. "You're useless. Couldn't even keep your wife. You've disgraced the whole family. Your divorce is the talk of the town. Relatives and neighbors are laughing in my face." His words cut like knives, leaving me speechless. My mother, Fatima, was no better. She came out from the kitchen and started berating me, saying every failure was my own fault. "You've always been weak, spineless. That's why your life fell into this pit. Even as a kid, you were like that. Never amounted to anything." She spat, eyes blazing with anger, not a trace of sympathy. They stood together condemning me. Not one question of concern, only accusations. As if I were the greatest shame they'd ever had. My heart broke all over again. I had been waiting for a shred of comfort, but there was none. When I begged to stay just a few days so I could get back on my feet, they exchanged annoyed glances and flatly refused. "We don't want to get tangled up in your mess anymore. Deal with it yourself." The confrontation ended with them kicking me out, hurling a few last venomous words. "Don't ever come back. You only bring disgrace to this family." I stepped outside, ears ringing from the shock, feeling lower than a stranger. Sitting in the old pickup, tears started falling without warning, my throat tight as childhood memories flooded back like an old film playing in reverse. I remembered that even as a kid, my parents always looked down on me. Every small mistake was blown into a huge failure, making me feel like a constant burden. At family gatherings, they always compared me to my cousins, the ones who got perfect grades and endless praise, while I was labeled the timid, slow one, and I could only hang my head in burning shame. Despite the scolding and contempt, I had always tried to do my duty, waking early to help with chores, studying hard even if I wasn't a genius, and once I grew up, sending money home to honor them. Yet I never received a single word of praise or a proud look, only criticism. Those memories made me realize I had been rejected by my own family long ago. Today they simply said it out loud, leaving me utterly alone in the dark with nowhere to call home. I drove off aimlessly, tears blurring the road, heart pounding with pain and anger. Was this finally the bottom? I pulled over on the side of the road, stared into the endless darkness, and wondered how much longer I could keep going. But then Nasir's face appeared in my mind, and I knew I have to get back up. I wiped away my tears, started the engine, and drove straight toward the outskirts of Houston, where cheap motels sprout like mushrooms after the rain. Late that night, I found a rundown complex with a flickering, half-dead neon sign. I rented a damp, bare room, just a creaking bed, a rotting wooden table, and enough space to survive day to day. I lay down, my body utterly exhausted, but sleep didn't come easily. The roar of trucks on the nearby highway echoed like a constant reminder. My life was now an endless loop of loneliness. In those first days living alone in that suffocating space, I tried to pull myself together, telling myself I had to start over even though everything had collapsed. Every morning when I woke up, I looked in the mirror, saw a gaunt face with dark circles under my eyes, and forced myself to say, "Come on, Pablo. You've got experience, you've got a degree, things will be okay." I sat at the rickety wooden table, opened my old laptop, the last valuable thing I hadn't sold, and rewrote my resume. I highlighted my excellent engineering degree from the University of Texas and years of offshore experience, repairing machinery in deep water, leading crews through storms. I sent applications to dozens of companies in Houston, from giant oil conglomerates to small workshops. Every time I hit send, my heart raced, anxiously waiting for a spark of hope. I imagined getting a call for an interview, landing a new job, earning enough to see Nasir regularly. I even dreamed of hiring a lawyer to fight for custody, to take back some justice from Regina and Case. But reality was far crueler than I'd imagined. Every interview ended the same way: rejection without explanation, or a vague "we'll be in touch," followed by total silence. I clearly remember my first interview at a small oil equipment maintenance company. I wore my only remaining suit, forced a confident smile, and answered every question clearly about my experience. The interviewer nodded approvingly and said, "Great. Your profile fits what we're looking for." I left that building with my heart pounding, convinced my luck had finally turned. 2 days later came the rejection email. "Thank you, but we've chosen another candidate." No reason, no explanation. I tried again with other companies, then more, but the result was always the same. My heart grew heavier. I felt a jolt of dread every time I opened my inbox, only to find another rejection. Why? What am I doing wrong? I asked myself at night, lying on the bed staring at the water-stained ceiling. Then finally, a major energy corporation in Houston offered me a senior engineer position. I got the call. The voice on the other end was enthusiastic. "Welcome to the team." My heart exploded with joy. I ran around the tiny motel room like an idiot, laughing to myself. This is it, the chance to start over, I thought, picturing my first paycheck, renting a decent place, taking Nasir out on weekends. The first few days at the new job, I worked hard, fixed equipment quickly, and even earned praise from coworkers. But just days later, the nightmare returned. My new boss called me into his office, face grim. "Pablo, we have to let you go. Orders from above." The reason was vague, just not a cultural fit. I froze, heart pounding in shock. "Why? What did I do wrong?" I asked, voice trembling. He only shook his head and avoided my eyes. A bad feeling crept in. I started digging. I called a few old contacts in the industry and asked discreetly. And then the devastating truth hit me like a punch in the face. Case Harlow had quietly used his power and money to destroy my reputation. He'd spread rumors that I was mentally unstable, a former disciplinary problem, and even sent fake emails to potential employers warning them not to hire me. One friend told me, "Word is Harlow's paying people off. Anyone who hires you loses contracts with his group." I collapsed onto the motel floor, hands shaking as I held the phone, feeling the whole world tightening around my throat. Rage and panic mixed inside me. I wanted to storm into his office and smash his face, but I knew I couldn't. My career was completely ruined. The oil and gas world in Texas is small, and Case's mark was all over it. Realizing that, I had no choice but to take heavy manual labor just to survive. I woke before dawn, put on old clothes, and went to unload trucks at warehouses, lifting heavy crates under the scorching sun until my back felt like it would snap. In the afternoons, I washed dishes at a local diner, hands cracked and raw from hours in soapy water. Late at night, I delivered food, driving my beat-up pickup through rain-slicked streets. After late shifts, body aching, clothes soaked with sweat and rain, I trudged back to the motel through dark streets, feeling like the world had shoved me into a dead-end alley. My heart raced whenever I thought about the future. Would I even survive? Every evening on the walk from the parking lot to my room, I passed a small dark park near the complex, empty, desolate, with skeletal trees and cold stone benches. It was right here on one freezing night that I first met the homeless old man, and the moment I gave him my coat to save his life, I unknowingly opened a new chapter of my fate. At the time, I had no idea. After that night, life went on, leaving the motel before dawn, working myself to the bone until the city lights came on, then dragging myself home through the silent park. Every night I passed by, I stopped for a few minutes at the familiar bench where the old man rested, now wrapped in the thin blanket I'd brought him after that first encounter. When we met again, he softly introduced himself as Benson, his voice trembling from the cold but full of gratitude. "You saved my life that night, son. I'm Benson," he said, his eyes shining under the dim streetlight. I just smiled and shook my head. "Anyone would have done the same, sir." But Benson shook his head and said the world rarely had people as kind as me, and from then on he treated me with real affection. From that day forward, whenever I had leftover food from the diner, a sandwich, an old jacket, a pair of nearly new socks bought with my meager savings, I brought them to Benson, sharing whatever little I had. He accepted them with a grateful smile, and we began to talk. On nights when life crushed me until I could barely breathe, back aching from lifting crates, hands sore from washing dishes, heart heavy with missing Nasir, I went to Benson and poured it all out. I told him about my childhood of being belittled, my marriage destroyed by Regina and Case, my career ruined, the lonely days no one understood. "Sir, it feels like my life is cursed," I said, voice breaking, heart racing as I finally opened up. Benson listened carefully, his old eyes sometimes lighting up with a strange understanding. He never judged, he just nodded and offered short but profound advice. "Life is like the ocean, son. Storms come and go. What matters is keeping a steady hand on the wheel." Those words helped me stand firm in the storm of life, like a sedative in the dead of night. Gradually, I stopped seeing Benson as a stranger and started thinking of him as an old friend, the only person who listened without judging or looking down on me. Benson opened up too, occasionally sharing fragments of his own life. Years of loss and loneliness not so different from mine. "I once had a family, a steady job, then everything fell apart," he said in a low, sad voice that made me lean in, heart pounding with anticipation. Though our circumstances were worlds apart, me a jobless engineer, him a homeless wanderer, we found common ground, both alone, both carrying wounds too deep to speak of easily, both living in the shadows where no one truly cared. Those evening talks in the park became my lifeline, making me feel still connected to the world, that someone still saw worth in me. The conversation stretched on, from the weather to the meaning of life, and I began looking forward to them like an essential part of my day. But I had no idea that this humble homeless friend was watching me in a completely different way, his eyes sometimes flashing with sharp intelligence, as if evaluating me. And he was the one who, in a single moment soon to come, would turn my entire life upside down. Every night on the way home, I thought of Benson with a little warmth, but also with worry. Was he okay in the cold? My life went on, full of defeats and faint glimmers of hope, but deep inside I could sense a change drawing near. Those days passed like an endless loop of hell, but my friendship with Benson was the only bright spot keeping me from sinking completely. I still worked myself to the bone from morning till night, my body exhausted but my spirit desperately clinging on. One sweltering noon in Houston, the sun scorching like it wanted to burn the skin right off me, I stood in the lobby of my old company, Harlow Energy Group, wearing a faded delivery uniform, an old polo shirt with frayed shoulders and the cheap diner logo, clutching a steaming bag of food. This place used to be my pride. Every morning I walked in here as an offshore engineer, head held high, greeted warmly by colleagues. And now, here I was, a stranger in my own past, sweating buckets under the blazing sun, holding a foam container of burgers and fries, waiting for someone to take the order. Bitterness surged through me as memories of better days flooded back. strategy meetings about oil extraction, laughing with coworkers, the feeling of being part of something big. Now I was just a delivery guy, a failure returning to the scene of his own downfall. My heart clenched. I was terrified someone would recognize me, or worse, look at me with pity. I just handed over the order, pocketed a few measly tip dollars, and was about to bolt to escape the flood of memories. My steps were hurried, head down, trying to avoid any familiar faces that might pass by. But then a sharp, mocking voice rang out behind me, yanking me out of my thoughts. Well, look who it is. The great engineer Ritter, now a delivery boy. Life turns fast, doesn't it? That voice was so familiar it felt like a hand squeezing my heart until it stopped. Blood rushed to my face. I froze, fingers tightening around the strap of my bag, fighting the tremble in my hands. Someone snickered. The air suddenly grew heavy. I turned slowly, heart pounding like war drums, and went numb when I saw Regina and Case standing side by side. They looked rich, arrogant. Regina in a tight dress and glittering jewelry, Case in an expensive suit, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder as if flaunting their happiness on the ruins of my life. Regina looked more radiant than ever, hair in an elegant updo, fake smile plastered on, while Case wore that familiar cold expression like a king surveying his domain. They stopped and stared at me like I was a broken toy. Why were they here? Why did fate shove me into this moment? Curious employees started gathering, pointing at me. The guy who used to be the company's star, the one who led major projects, now standing in the lobby holding cheap takeout. I heard whispers. That's Pablo, right? He looks pathetic. I heard he got fired for punching the boss. Those words cut like knives. My face burned with humiliation. I wanted to run, took a step back, but Regina deliberately blocked my path, her cold eyes scanning my disheveled appearance, sweat-soaked shirt, worn jeans, filthy shoes. She smirked and unleashed a torrent of insults. Look at you, Pablo. Poor, pathetic, a hopeless failure. Didn't you used to think you were the family breadwinner? And now? Scraping together pennies, doing odd jobs? You deserve it. Her voice echoed through the lobby, dripping with venom. I tried to swallow, my heart racing so loud I could hear it in my ears, wanting to fight back, but my throat closed up. Case stood beside her, arms crossed, staring down at me with pure arrogance, a contemptuous smile on his lips. You never belonged in this industry, Pablo. You're only fit for low-life jobs. You'll never lift your head again. His words stabbed straight into my heart. Memories of the night he stole my wife came rushing back, making me shake with rage and shame. The crowd grew louder. Some sneered, some shook their heads in pity, others pulled out phones to record. I felt exposed, stripped bare under the cruel gaze of the world. Laughter echoed, whispers spread, and I stood there, legs trembling with humiliation, face burning like fire. I didn't know where to hide. Past and present had cornered me with no way out. My heart pounded wildly, nerves so frayed I wanted to cry, thinking, why is life this cruel? What did I do to deserve this? The suffocating atmosphere reached its peak. The laughter and insults crashed over me like waves, and I just wanted to disappear. I lowered my head, trying to back away, when suddenly a loud roar came from outside, a convoy of engines. A line of sleek black luxury SUVs pulled up in front of the building, tinted windows gleaming, special plates catching the light. The crowd froze in surprise. Everyone turned, whispers shifting to curiosity. Who's that? Some big shot? My heart was still racing, but the sudden change made me look up, nerves on edge, waiting. The door of the lead SUV opened and out stepped none other than Benson, the homeless old man I'd saved. But today he was completely different, icy, commanding, untouchable. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, silver hair neatly combed, walking with steady authority flanked by a team of bodyguards. His face no longer carried the weariness of a street wanderer. It radiated power, his sharp eyes sweeping the crowd. When I saw Benson, I was stunned, mouth hanging open, heart pounding like it would explode. Benson? The old man from the park? I whispered, unable to believe my eyes. How was he here, looking like this? Meanwhile, Case's face went white as a sheet, panic in his eyes like he'd seen his worst nightmare come to life. He stumbled back a step, stammering, "Dad, why are you here?" The entire lobby fell dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Benson walked straight toward us, eyes fixed only on Case and me. He stopped right in front of us, his icy gaze locked on Case, then raised his hand and delivered a thunderous slap across his son's face in front of hundreds of staring eyes. The sharp crack echoed through the hall, silencing everything. Case staggered, clutching his reddened cheek, face flushed with pain and humiliation. Regina stood frozen, mouth agape in shock. And I just stood there, heart pounding out of control, realizing that my life was about to take a turn no one, least of all me, could have ever predicted. The entire lobby fell dead silent. Not a cough, not even a heavy breath. Hundreds of eyes were wide open as if they had just witnessed the sun rising in the west. Their CEO, the most powerful man in the building, the one whose mere frown could silence an entire floor, had just been slapped across the face in broad daylight by a silver-haired old man. I stood frozen like a statue, my mind spinning, unable to reconcile the two images. The shivering old man curled up on a park bench on that freezing winter night, and the man now standing before me in a glossy black suit, radiating the overwhelming presence of a king reclaiming his throne. My heart pounded so hard my ears rang. I barely dared to breathe, terrified this was all a dream and that I'd wake up still clutching a greasy food bag amid mocking laughter. Case was the first to break the silence. He stammered, his voice trembling, stripped of every trace of authority. "Dad, when did you get back? Why are you doing this in front of the employees?" He tried to stand tall, but his hand still covered his stinging cheek, eyes flashing with fear and fury. Regina had gone ashen, lips quivering, unconsciously clutching Case's arm as if he might vanish. I stared at Benson, waiting for an explanation, any explanation, but he didn't answer right away. He simply swept his gaze slowly across the lobby, his eyes sharp as blades, making people instinctively lower their heads or step back. Then Benson pointed straight at me, his hand trembling slightly with pent-up emotion. His voice rang out deep, heavy, every word carved into the air. "Pablo Ritter. This is the most decent man I have ever met. He saved my life on the coldest night I've ever known, when I had not a penny to my name and not a soul beside me. He took off the very last coat on his back and wrapped it around me, asking for nothing, not even knowing who I was. Then he whipped around to face Case, his gaze so piercing the whole lobby seemed to shudder. His voice dropped, icy and steel-hard. And my son has never once understood what the words humanity and decency even mean." The lobby held its breath again. I could hear my own heart thundering in my chest. Case's face turned crimson with shame and rage. He shouted, "You can't do this. I'm the CEO. You can't humiliate me in front of the entire company." He took a desperate step forward, voice cracking. Benson only gave a cold, cutting smirk. "That slap was far too light for everything you've done over the past 5 years, Case." At that exact moment, the private elevator at the end of the lobby dinged. The doors slid open. Out stepped the entire top brass of the corporation. People ordinary employees only ever saw on screen during shareholder meetings. The chairman of the board, the CFO, the general counsel, all in black suits, faces grave. And what nearly knocked me over, they bowed deeply, respectfully, and in perfect unison said, "We welcome the chairman back." Not to Case, to Benson. In a matter of seconds, everything became blindingly clear, like someone had switched on floodlights in the dead of night. Benson Harlow wasn't just Case's father. He was the founder, the supreme chairman, the reclusive billionaire behind the entire Harlow Energy Group. The man who had turned a small company into a multi-billion-dollar energy empire. The one the press called the silent monster of Texas. The man no one had seen in public for 5 whole years because he had withdrawn from high society and vanished. And that man had lived as a homeless vagrant curled up on a park bench while I gave him the last coat I owned. I stood there, speechless, legs going weak, gripping a nearby pillar to keep from collapsing. The old friend I'd shared leftover sandwiches with, the one I'd poured my heart out to about losing my son, my wife, everything, was the billionaire who held an empire in his hands. Benson gestured for me to follow him into the chairman's private elevator. Behind us, Case's eyes blazed with helpless fury and Regina's face was drained of color. Watching them stand frozen in the lobby, I knew everything had slipped completely out of their control. And for the first time, I was no longer the powerless one in this story. He raised a hand. 2 bodyguards immediately cleared the path. I walked behind him, head still reeling, ears ringing with the explosion of whispers breaking out behind us. Case shouted something, but the noise swallowed it whole. Regina stood pale as death, hands shaking, staring at me in pure panic, as if she had just realized she had bet on the wrong side. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the elevator doors closed in front of me, their eyes filled with curiosity and wary respect. In just a few minutes, the entire power structure of the building had been turned upside down. I, the man they had mocked and looked down on, was being personally escorted by the true chairman. And the man they had once feared now stood humiliated, stripped of all authority. The elevator rose silently to the top floor, the only sound the frantic thumping of my heart in my chest. I glanced at Benson. He stood perfectly straight, hands clasped in front of him, face calm as if he'd just taken a leisurely stroll through the park instead of overturning an entire empire. 1,000 questions burned in my throat, but all I could manage was a hoarse whisper. You're really Chairman Harlow? Benson gave a small nod, his eyes warm. You'll understand everything soon, son. The doors slid open onto a long hallway of polished marble I had never set foot in before. 2 bodyguards stood on either side and bowed as we passed. Massive walnut doors swung open, and I stepped into the chairman's office, a space so vast I nearly staggered. One wall was floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the glittering sprawl of Houston in the late afternoon sun. On the opposite side stood an ebony desk. Behind it hung an abstract painting worth a fortune. I stood there awkwardly, still in my filthy delivery uniform, clutching the now cold foam food container. Benson smiled faintly and motioned for me to sit on the plush leather sofa. I sat, hands trembling on my knees. Benson walked around the desk but didn't take the chairman's chair. He stood gazing out at the city, then began to speak, slowly, deliberately, every word landing like stone. 5 years ago, I told the world I was retiring to travel the globe, to rest after decades building Harlow Energy. The press went wild. The stock price actually rose because people thought I was finally handing the reins to the next generation. I gave full operational control to Case, my only son. But that wasn't retirement, Pablo. That was the final test I set for him. He turned to me, eyes full of pain. I wanted to see what he would do with the company I built from nothing once I was no longer standing behind him. A few months later, Benson had quietly returned to the United States. Only 5 people, his most loyal lieutenants from the early days, knew. They formed a secret oversight team that operated 24/7, monitoring every transaction, every meeting, every email. And Benson himself disguised himself as a homeless old man, living quietly in parks, bus stations, and under bridges around Houston. He wanted to see with his own eyes how his son treated employees, how he dealt with partners, and most importantly, what the real world truly thought of the empire he had created. The results horrified him. Case ran the company with ruthless greed, cooking the books, exploiting workers, slashing benefits, driving smaller divisions to the brink of bankruptcy just to funnel money into his own pockets. Dozens of community projects Benson had personally championed were quietly killed. Employees were fired without cause, wages withheld, pressure so intense that many broke down mentally. Worse still, Case had secretly colluded with a handful of major shareholders, plotting to permanently remove Benson from the board and seize the chairman's seat for good. "I never thought my own son would dare," Benson said, voice cracking. "I taught him that money can be lost, but honor cannot. Yet he sold his honor for power. Then he looked straight at me, eyes suddenly alight. "Until I met you." When my ordeal began, Benson had been sitting in the park near my motel. He heard reports of a skilled engineer wrongfully fired and systematically blacklisted simply for refusing to bow to case. He started watching me, how I worked myself to the bone without complaint, how I still smiled at delivery customers even when exhausted, how I shared my last scraps of food with a homeless old man even when I myself was hungry. And then, on that freezing night when I gave him my very last coat, Benson knew he had found the answer to his 5-year test. "The humiliation you suffered today was the final straw," he said firmly. "Not just to restore your honor, but to rip out the rot that has infected this company root and branch." That very afternoon, Benson called an emergency shareholders meeting. He allowed me to sit quietly in the corner as the witness to the truth. The auditorium was packed, tension thick enough to cut. Case strode in looking confident, immaculate suit, flashing his usual smile at the shareholders. Until Benson walked in through the side door in a black suit radiating absolute authority. Benson didn't greet anyone. He simply raised a hand. The giant screen lit up. Evidence poured across it. Falsified financial reports, collusion emails, recordings of Case accepting bribes, photos of employees forced to work unpaid overtime, even the full plan to permanently oust Benson from the board. All of it collected over 5 years by the shadow team. The room went dead silent. Case leapt to his feet, screaming denials, blaming secretaries, partners, anyone but himself. But the evidence was overwhelming, airtight, undeniable. The board voted on the spot, 30 seconds. An absolute majority. Case Harlow was removed as CEO. Stripped of all operational authority, and the company ordered a full audit while turning files over to federal investigators. When the result was announced, Benson called me forward in front of everyone. He placed a hand on my shoulder and declared, voice echoing through the hall, "This man, Pablo Ritter, saved my life on the coldest night I ever lived. He showed me that decency still exists in this world. Today I am giving him back the chance to stand tall in the very place where he was once crushed." He turned to me in front of the most powerful shareholders in Texas. "Pablo, starting tomorrow, you are Executive Vice President of Engineering and Safety, reporting directly to me. Salary triple what you earned before, plus company stock. You've earned it." Tears choked me. I could only bow deeply and whisper, "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much." Case shot up from his chair, face purple with humiliation and rage. He screamed something incoherent, then stormed out, swiping an arm across the table and sending stacks of documents flying like a small tornado. The conference room doors slammed shut behind him, leaving only heavy silence. I watched him go, feeling no fear, no pain, just an overwhelming lightness. The darkest chapter was finally closed. Case, the man who had destroyed my life, had dug his own grave. And I, once the grimy delivery man, now stood at the very top of the place that had once buried me. Benson clapped me on the shoulder. "Go home, shower, rest. Tomorrow you start fresh. And this time no one will ever lay a hand on you again." I nodded, tears falling silently. Not from sorrow, but because after so much suffering, justice had finally come. Not through violence, not through money, but through the simple kindness I had never lost. I walked out of that meeting room with my head held high. The long hallway fell silent and bowed as I passed. I was no longer the failure. I was Pablo Ritter, survivor of hell, and now, by destiny's own hand, returned to the place I truly belonged. News of Case's dismissal spread like wildfire. Within hours, the entire Harlow Energy Group knew. Internal messages, group chats, emails, then the press, then social media. That same evening, scandal after scandal broke, hundreds of millions siphoned off, subsidiaries deliberately driven into bankruptcy for personal gain, employees exploited, taxes evaded. Major shareholders demanded a full investigation, and within days, Case Harlow's reputation was utterly destroyed. From Texas oil prince to fraud of the century. He was banned from leaving the country, his accounts frozen, his lawyers scrambling to negotiate reduced sentences. I heard the news and felt nothing but a long, quiet sigh. The man who had once been my nightmare was now just a ghost gnawing at himself. The day Case left the company is one I will never forget. He walked through the ground floor lobby in a black suit. Hundreds of employees who once trembled at a single glance from him now stood perfectly still. No greetings, no eye contact. That cold silence was more terrifying than any jeer. Case kept his head down, hurried out the door, got into his Bentley and disappeared into the pouring Houston rain. I watched from a high-floor window. No smile, no gloating. Just a sudden lightness in my chest. Later, Benson told me, "I didn't do this just for you, Pablo. 5 years of watching showed me that boy is no longer my son. He betrayed his family and everything I built. You were simply the last drop that made the cup overflow." I understood, and I was grateful he had chosen justice over blood. And so I began a completely new chapter. My first day as Executive Vice President of Engineering and Safety, I wore the brand new suit Benson had given me and walked into the building feeling for the first time in my life like I was truly breathing with my own lungs. Employees bowed with genuine respect. No more pitying looks, no more whispers behind my back. I had my own office overlooking the city, a salary triple my old one, company stock, and, most importantly, the chance to prove I belonged. I worked like a man possessed, overhauled every safety protocol on the rigs, drove workplace accidents down to nearly zero within 6 months. Benson often clapped me on the shoulder. "You're doing better than I ever did, son. My judgment of people was never wrong." I moved out of that miserable motel the very next week. A 2-bedroom apartment near downtown with a small balcony full of plants and a room just for Nasir, walls covered in superhero posters. The first time I stepped inside, I stood in the empty living room and cried silently. This was home, a real home. With my new position, I immediately hired one of Houston's top divorce attorneys, the kind who works for oil billionaires. We filed to reopen the divorce case armed with irrefutable evidence. Emails, texts, recordings proving Case had tampered with the original proceedings, bribed witnesses, doctored documents. Regina panicked when she was served. By then, Case had cut her off completely. No calls, no money, no explanation. She lost her job. Her old PR firm dropped her the moment the scandal broke. Friends vanished, family turned away. She was utterly alone. The second trial took only 3 weeks. Regina sat in court looking thin and worn, no longer the glamorous woman with perfect makeup, eyes red from crying. The evidence was overwhelming. Adultery, manipulation of records, financial instability, unfit to raise a child. The judge read the ruling clearly. Full custody of Nasir to me, Regina ordered to pay monthly child support and granted only supervised visitation. The moment the gavel fell, Regina broke down sobbing in the courtroom, her face collapsing. But I just stood there silent. I felt no pity. She had chosen this path long ago. Today was simply the ending she had written for herself. The day Nasir moved in with me was the best day of my life. I stood at the door, heart racing as the social worker's car pulled up. Nasir stepped out with his little Superman backpack, eyes wide, looking around. When he saw me, he ran and threw his arms around me, holding on tight. "Daddy, are you really taking me home?" I knelt down, hugged him so hard I could barely breathe, tears streaming onto his hair. "Yes, son. From now on, we'll never be apart again." We stood in the living room like that, hugging and crying until we were both laughing through the tears. I made the tacos he loved. We ate on the floor because the table hadn't arrived yet. That night, he fell asleep in my arms. I kissed his forehead, tears falling again. At last, I had taken back the most important thing in my life. As for Regina, old friends told me she now lives in a tiny rented apartment, works part-time, has no one from her old life left, and her family just shakes their heads. People whisper that she once slept with a CEO now under criminal investigation, and her reputation is shattered. I don't gloat. I just feel calm. She was once my wife, the woman I loved most, but now she is only a part of a past that is dead. A few months later, when my life had truly settled, my parents showed up unannounced at my new apartment. They were dressed neatly, Mom holding a tin of cookies, Dad wearing an awkward smile. "Pablo, we haven't seen you in so long, so we came to visit." They talked about reconciliation, about starting over, how proud they were now that I was successful, how the family should be together again. I listened in silence, not inviting them in right away. I looked into their eyes and saw clearly. It wasn't love, it was pride. They had thrown me out like a stray dog when I had nothing. Now they saw the nice car, the beautiful apartment, the big title, and came crawling back. I shook my head gently. "Thank you for coming, but there's no longer room in my life for people who abandoned me when I needed them most." I stood up again on my own 2 feet. I have a new family now, Nasir and the people who were actually there for me at my lowest. My door is always open to those who stood by me in the darkest times. As for you, we ended the day you slammed the door in my face. My mother burst into tears, covering her face. "Pablo, I'm sorry. Can't we start over?" My father shouted angrily. "You ungrateful brat. You'll regret treating your parents this way." I just stood in the doorway and answered calmly, "I've regretted enough, but not today. Please leave." My father opened his mouth to say more, but I quietly closed the door. Their shouting echoed for a few seconds, then faded into silence. I walked back to the living room. Nasir was building with Lego and looked up. "Who was that, Daddy?" I ruffled his hair and smiled warmly. "Nothing, son. Just some strangers who got the wrong apartment." I closed the door, and with it I finally shut the darkest chapter of my life, strong enough now to leave it behind forever. These days, every morning I wake up and see Nasir sleeping peacefully in his sunlit room. Look out at the green plants on the balcony and know that every ounce of pain was worth it. I lost everything once, then gained back far more. Not money, not titles, but the certainty that as long as you never lose yourself, no matter how deep you fall, you can always rise again. Time flew by in the blink of an eye, and my life finally settled into a steady, solid rhythm, stronger than ever before. The new role of executive vice president was going so well that sometimes I had to pinch myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Colleagues respected me not because of the title or because I was the chairman's guy, but because the ideas I brought to the table actually made a difference. I overhauled the safety systems on the rigs. The company's accident-free streak hit record highs and kept climbing. The engineering team started calling me the quiet hero. Benson treated me like a true confidant, often inviting me into his private office to discuss strategy. "You have the perspective of someone who's been through real hardship, Pablo," he would say, his voice low but warm. "That's exactly what I need to keep this company on the right path." Those conversations made my heart race, not from fear, but because for the first time I felt truly trusted and part of building something great, something I had only ever dreamed of from afar. Our little 2-bedroom apartment became a real home, every corner filled with laughter and warmth. Mornings were chaos in the best way, Nasir chattering while getting ready for school, running around the kitchen as I made coffee and toasted sandwiches. "Daddy, today we have art class. I'm gonna draw you as a superhero," he'd shout, eyes sparkling, making me laugh until tears came. Evenings, he'd burst into the living room waving a drawing or a math test. "Look, Dad, I got an A." We'd sit on the couch, eat dinner together, talk about our days, and I felt a simple happiness I'd never known before. Those moments still make my heart race, afraid they're too fragile, but I've learned to hold them close like treasures. On free weekends, I took Nasir to the very park where I once met Benson, the place that had witnessed my deepest despair, where I once walked coatless through freezing nights with no hope. Now it was where father and son laughed out loud on the same stone benches. We flew kites, kicked a soccer ball, or just sat eating ice cream watching the leaves fall. Those visits stir memories, but they no longer hurt. They remind me that new life grows from ashes. The old wounds still linger somewhere in my memory like faint scars on skin. Sometimes I still wake up in a cold sweat, dreaming of Regina's sneer, Case slamming me against the wall, or my parents slamming the door in my face. But I've learned to see them as part of my journey, not chains holding me back. They taught me strength, taught me who truly matters. I no longer let them control me. Instead, I use them to remind myself, I walked through hell and came out the other side, so now anything is possible. Benson drops by now and then, not as the chairman of a billion-dollar empire, but as an old friend who once received warmth from the coat of a broken man who still had kindness left. He comes in the late afternoons with a bottle of aged wine, and we sit on the balcony talking. Do you remember that night, Pablo? You took off your coat for me while you were shaking from the cold yourself. He smiles, eyes glistening. I nod, heart racing at the memory. I just did what was right, sir. Those visits are full of emotion, making me marvel at our strange journey from a park bench to a billionaire's office. Benson always says, never forget who you were. That's your strength. Looking back on the climb from the abyss, I realized what changed my life wasn't physical strength, money, or power. It was the choice not to become bitter, even when life pushed me to the edge of darkness. On those freezing nights, those back-breaking manual labor days, those moments of despair when I wanted to give up, I still chose kindness. And that choice opened a door I never saw coming. I've learned that sometimes one small act, holding on to the last bit of decency, can open a door you never imagined. That old coat was just a worn-out piece of clothing, but it saved Benson's life, and through him, it saved mine. I often tell Nasir so he'll understand. Son, never wait to do good. Do it the moment you can, because life has a strange way of paying it back. I've taken to heart the lesson of resilience. Some things can be lost, stolen, or betrayed. Jobs, family, friends. But character is the one thing no one can take unless you let it go. I nearly let it go, lying in that damp motel room thinking I had nothing left. But I didn't. I held on to my character, and it pulled me up. I understand now that forgiveness isn't for the person who hurt you. It's so you can move forward without carrying the weight of hate. Hatred only keeps you trapped in a burned-out past, living forever in darkness. I've forgiven Regina, Case, my parents, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve to be free. When I think of them now, there's no anger, only peace. My advice to myself and to anyone who's been broken the way I was: sometimes life throws you to the bottom not to destroy you, but to force you to see who's really on your side, and to learn to stand up using the strength inside you. I saw clearly. Regina chose money. Case chose power. My parents chose false pride. Only Benson, a stranger, stood with me because of kindness. And I stood up not because of anyone else, but because I refused to surrender. I believe life doesn't measure a person by what they have at the top, but by how they rise from the very bottom with dignity, integrity, and compassion, even for strangers. I once had a stable job and a happy family, but that wasn't the real me. The real me is the man who gave his coat to a stranger on a freezing night, the father who cried holding his son in an empty living room, the man who refused to return to a toxic past. And when I watch Nasir sleeping peacefully in his little sunlit room, I know that even though I once lost nearly everything, I regained what matters most: the right to be a good father, and the right to write my own life the way I deserve. I lie beside my son, listening to his steady breathing, and I smile. My life is finally mine and no one else's.